Okay, and we are back. Part three, Burning Bright, analysis and discussion of Fahrenheit 451. Yeah, that looks right. I didn't think it was spelled right. But yeah, okay, so we're back now. We talked previously about part two, Saving the Sand. And as we left off, Montag had gone back to the fire department. He had taken the book back, the Bible, he'd given it to Beatty, and they were all playing cards, and all of a sudden they get an alert, hop in the fire trucks, and off they go. But the call is to, you guessed it, Montag's house. So as we go over this, we're going to have the same themes and colors: mass media, censorship, conformity to individuality, distraction versus happiness, action versus inaction. Those are going to be things that we talk about as we go through and take a look, and you're going to see them show up here. So here we have the summary and then the analysis. So here we go. The firemen are showing up at the house. The neighbors come out to watch, of course, because that's what happens when something's going on at anyone's home. So the neighbors come out to watch, and they look at as Montag gets there, he looks over at Clarice's empty house, and I think he's still wondering because remember, after she left, her family just they left. So did she really die? Was she taken? I mean, there's so many questions we have there that you need to be asking. The questions are important. What do you think happened? So Beatty notices, and then Montag, he mocks Montag for being influenced by her nonsense. So another question: do you think that Beatty had something to do with Clarice's disappearance? Or, as someone mentioned in class, we talked about how Mildred drives she just drives crazy, and she could have hit her. Maybe she was the actual one who hit her. Who knows? But like Daisy in Gatsby, she wouldn't have seen any responsibility. But it's interesting that Beatty mocks him, almost as though he's letting him know, maybe is he a strong enough character? Is he powerful enough in this society to have done something about it? Mildred runs out of the house with her suitcase and disappears into a taxi. Now, that's interesting because they're going to burn the house, but apparently Mildred can go wherever she wants to. But this is when Montag knows it was she who called the police. So he's been betrayed by his wife. And I don't even think he really even cares because I don't think he loves her. I don't think there's any kind of an emotional connection. But here we've got a comment that or the analysis that Mildred is emotionally disconnected, so she can turn her husband in, leave in a taxi, start a new life, and she can be with the people she really cares about, her TV family, anywhere. Just like her friend said in the previous section, if her husband died in the war, she'd just marry again. So these people, there's no connection, there's no love for someone else. So Mildred's called in and basically said Montag has books. Beatty orders Montag to destroy his own house with a flamethrower or get hunted down by the mechanical hound. Now, we've talked in class a little bit about the mechanical hound, but we've not really seen the mechanical hound. Faber, speaking through the earpiece that Montag still has, begs him to run away, but Montag burns his house. And Montag burns his own house, recalls the old woman who burned down her house instead of allowing the firemen to do it, and then burns in her house. So maybe this is Montag's pivotal moment where he's taking responsibility for he's not going to give them the gratification. He'll burn it down. He doesn't care about his house. Um, and maybe at this point he makes this is his moment that he realizes I'm going to end my ties here and I'm going to do something because remember he wanted to do something. Um, this is a little bit of a contrast from the Montag in the 2018 movie that we watched, if you'll remember, and how he reacted at this point. And we might ask ourselves, we might compare those two events, how that Montag, even though he was a very strong character, how what choice he made and why he made that choice. But here, ask yourself, why does Montag burning down his own house? Why is that actually why does that seem like a point of strength for Montag? It doesn't seem like it's a weakness. It seems like he's like, just give it to me. I'll do it. Back off. I'm burning. He burns his own house. Doesn't allow the fireman to take something that's his. What do you think? Do you think that's something that does it show strength? Does it show that he's got a made a turning point? What do you think? Remember the questions. The questions are as important as anything. So Beatty actually arrests Montag here. And again, he's mocking him. He's making fool of him for reading the poetry to Mildred's friends because Mildred opened her big fat mouth and said everything. She wasn't loyal at all to Montag. Beatty strikes Montag, and then Faber's earpiece falls out. And Beatty promises, because he's a bully, he's an incredible bully, he promises to find out who that was, who's helping him. So Montag's still holding the flamethrower as Beatty provokes him with a quotation from Shakespeare and dares him to pull the trigger. And Montag does. He burns Beatty. Now, in the movie, at the end, I made a comment about how that ended and a contrast in the book and the movie. So I want you to remember that, and I want you to ask yourself, what is the what is the what are the comparisons here? What happens here? And how do you feel about this? When Montag uses the flamethrower and burns Beatty, how does that make you feel? Are you glad he does that? Is that a weakness that he burned Beatty? Do you feel like that's justified? And even more than that, do you think Beatty did that because he wanted to die? Do you think Beatty was truly happy? He had knowledge, he had all of the information, he had power. You could even argue here that he committed suicide by taunting Montag into burning him. Was Montag weak because of the choice he made? Or was Montag able to say, this is what I'm going to do? Was it a reaction? Do you think Montag was sorry for what he did? All of those are very viable questions, very reasonable questions. So Montag burns him, and Beatty's on fire, and he's burning, and he dies, and the other firemen are shocked. They stand still, shocked. And then Montag knocks them out. And then the mechanical hound comes after Montag because it's there and attacks Montag. Montag destroys it with a flamethrower, but not before it stabs him with a needle full of anesthetic. Now, the needle is supposed to be a kill shot. That mechanical hound, and we looked at those on YouTube, the modern mechanical hounds that our military has that are terrifying, and the ones that they're deploying on the border. If you haven't seen those, look those up on YouTube. Look up the mechanical dogs that the military's using. But yeah, this is not something futuristic. This is something we have in society today. We have this technology, and imagine how terrifying it is, even more so than an actual dog, because as we talked about in class, an actual dog gets tired. Mechanical hound tracking you down never gets tired, never loses its attention, never stops. Okay, so going to the analysis for a minute. Beatty's aggressive to the last moment. Why? Why does he continue to be so aggressive? He taunts Montag, who's just lost his house, his wife. He's arrested him, and then he continues to taunt him and make fun of him. And he's doing it with literature. So Montag knows you're arresting me, but you have all of this stored in your mind. I mean, that how can you have the knowledge you have and do what you do? So it seems pretty unwise for Beatty to continue to taunt him and harass him and bully him unless it was a purpose. Does he want to die? Because if he does, that's clearly a way to do it. Did he think that Montag was too weak to do it? Was he trying to show himself as this hero in front of the firemen? And what do you think the firemen feel right now, rather before they were knocked out? Because now they're knocked out, so they don't feel anything until they wake up. But what did the firemen feel? As they're watching Montag, the number one, he's in line for Beatty's place. He's the favorite, challenging Beatty and then killing Beatty. And he literally he commits treason against this his country, and he's become an enemy of the state in what he's done. But probably at this moment in his life, Montag is happier than he's ever been. Okay, on one numb and one good leg, Montag hobbles to the backyard. He gets four books because remember he had taken the books out of the house. He limps away, and then he feels that Beatty wanted to die. Maybe he did. Why would he want to die? Think about it. Why do you think he would? And as he runs, he gets the seashell radio out of his pocket, listens to the coverage of the citywide manhunt for him, and as Montag stops at the gas station bathroom to clean up, wash off, he hears over the radio that that war has been declared, of course, because again, we're talking distractions. We're talking both sides of corruption creating both sides of the war. And again, if you've got any kind of insurrection going on in a country, you want to divert the attention. One of the best ways to do that is war. So again, asking ourselves, why does Beatty continue to taunt Montag? That's something I want you to explore. There might be an essay. Does Beatty in fact want to die? In provocation of Montag in form of suicide, possibly part of the essay. It's another suggestion that Beatty, who quotes so readily and fluently from the same books he destroys, is a tortured soul who regrets his decision to remain a book destroying fireman. So I want you to think long and hard about that. And I want you to come down on one side or the other. Think about, is he a tortured soul, or is he a soul who enjoys torturing others? Do we have an answer? I don't know. I do know that I particularly hate Beatty in a way that I don't hate any other character in literature. He is he is terrible in what he does and how he acts. I'm not sure I can see himself as a tortured soul, but I would love for you to give me that argument. I would love to see that argument. I would love for you to develop that argument, and with from what you see in the book, and have that conversation. Do you think he regrets his decision to remain a book destroying fireman? But if he did, could he have left with all of his power? I don't know. But I promise that will be something that you're going to explore in an essay. So, crossing the street, Montag is nearly run down by what he thinks is a police car, but it turns out to be joyriding teenagers. He wonders if they're the same kids who killed Clarice. Um, as an aside here, is Clarice really dead? He thinks she is. Who knows? He continues in the darkness. He sneaks into the house of another fireman, hides the books in the kitchen. Is he setting the fireman up? Calls in an alarm from a nearby phone booth. Yes, he is. So Montag is trying to distract. Again, we've got more distraction here, and that's something Montag is doing also. And he knows that fireman's home is going to be burned, and possibly that fireman might be killed. But at this point, he's got a battle to fight. So Montag goes to Faber's house, tells him what happens, and Faber finally feels there's some movement started. He feels hope for the first time. This is how Montag, maybe, is it hopium? Is it hope without promise? Is it just hopium that he's giving him? Or does he have a real shot? Together, can they do something? Montag gives Faber his remaining money. The old man advises him to follow the river until he reaches the abandoned railroad tracks and then follow the tracks. And there are hobos living there along the tracks. Many of them are refugee intellectuals with Harvard degrees. So here at this point, we're supposed to see that people with Harvard degrees are equated with intelligence, and I would think that we could talk about that should probably be symbolistic of whether or not that these are bright people. These are intelligent people who are trying to escape the world they live in, and they want to make a better world. They agree to meet up in St. Louis, where that's where Faber's going to visit a retired printer. And this is really cool. The next part, you have the manhunt of Montag briefly on TV. So imagine, you got live streaming, you've got, all the people on TikTok or whatever, and they're catching glimpses. You've got the news live streaming, and it's like the entire society is becoming involved in a real world event, the chase of Montag. This fireman who was a superstar that people loved because he burned and he loved to burn. And then you see a new mechanical hound arrive on the scene of Beatty's death, and Montag is watching him. He's watching what's happening back at the scene of the death of Beatty, and he's kind of mesmerized a little bit. But this is really cool with the analysis here. The live coverage of the manhunt, complete with helicopter footage and running commentary, is another of Bradbury's predictions that came to pass in the United States before the end of the 20th century. Now, if you know anything about what happened with O.J. Simpson, um, this is what happened. O.J. Simpson was accused of killing his wife and a person who lived there at the home, Cato something. I remember watching it on TV, but I remember watching it was like the white Bronco, and they were following the white Bronco, and it was a manhunt, and everybody was watching the coverage on all the channels, and people were so waiting for that white Bronco to stop. If you haven't seen that coverage, I suggest you look it up on YouTube and just watch a little bit of it and imagine that kind of coverage going on, because I think that coverage went on for hours, like 5, 6, 7 hours. It was something that people were watching and literally spellbound by the spectacle. They were, just like it says, Montag was spellbound. Everybody was watching this this TV chase. So this is really cool that it was predicted by Bradbury at the same time, or back in the when he wrote this. So another prophecy, somewhat of a literary prophecy, comes into play. Montag advises Faber on how to eliminate Montag's scent from the house by burning things, wiping others with alcohol, and turning the sprinklers on in the yard, because he's an expert at that. So Montag takes a suitcase with some old clothes for Faber, says goodbye, leaves the house, heads toward the river because that's where the people are going to be. On the way, he's able to track the hound's approach by watching the TVs, because he sees what the hounds see. The hound stops at Faber's house but moves on. He knows how to remove the scent. But now remember, this is a mechanical hound, so it's never going to get tired. It's never going to give up. It's never going to stop. On the Seashell Radio Montag, here's the announcer telling everyone in the neighborhood to step outside, look for the fugitive. So people are looking for him. He reaches the river just as the doors begin to open. He throws away his clothes, douses himself with alcohol to mask his scent, puts on Faber's clothes, jumps into the water, floats with the current. So as we analyze, we see that everyone is tuned into the chase, of course, because this society is all about everything on TV. Montag is able to become fugitive and audience because he's able to watch and be part of at the same time. And what's scary is noticing how easily the authorities can use the TV and radio to mobilize the masses to look for Montag. Does that sound familiar? Do we have a society today that is under complete surveillance with TVs and cameras and cell phones and audio? Imagine what that would be like today in trying to find someone, especially if you've got people with streaming capability like we do. I mean, think about the Gabby Petito case. And when everybody was saying, "Hey, I saw Brian here and I saw Brian there," and they were showing videos. So it's grown even bigger than something like Twitter or a form of social media like that. You have actual streaming video where people are posting and viewing. You've got live footage on Instagram and Facebook and all of these things. So this is the citizen journalist can step out and record what's going on, and the government has access to all of this to find where anybody is at any given moment. They don't even have to do their job because the the community can do it for them. People can do it for them. So the authorities today are doing exactly what Bradbury predicted in the 50s. He's showing how TV and radio can be used to turn individuals into a mob that can basically execute the will of central authority. So media like TV and radio are much more powerful and destructive than books because books alone cannot mobilize a populace. That's important to think about. Books can give you ideas, but they can't, books are not going to um, tell you what to think. Books are going to give you the thoughts and allow you to think them on your own. Unlike TV and radio, books can't be controlled from a central source. So on this television, as they're watching, these people aren't given time to they're not asked, oh, do you think he's innocent? It's immediately, he is guilty, find him. We have to find him. And that's what they do. By the time the Hound and the searchlight equipped helicopters reach the river, Montag's already beyond the reach. He's downstream. He's floating along, watching the helicopters turn around and go back to the city. He comes ashore in a countryside. It's overcome by natural smells and darkness. And remember, this is not what the city's like. The city is perfect and manufactured, and even the smells and everything manufactured. This is completely different. This is the wilderness. And as he walks and stumbles across the railroad track, he feels certain that Clarice had once walked the same route. Do you think that means he expects her to be there? So the wild outdoors and the darkness of nighttime affect Montag deeply, just like we talked about just a minute ago, I think in the second section, about nature and how nature affects us. As human beings, the need we have to connect with nature and the natural world. You know, sunlight, vitamin D, all of that's important to keep us healthy. Being outdoors, that's important in order to the natural world in order to keep us sane. So whether or not Clarice walked those rails, it was her conversations with Montag that prepared him to walk in these steps. It was her conversations with Montag and maybe her experiences that prepared Montag to appreciate the natural world. Maybe he wouldn't have paid attention before had he not had an experience with Clarice. And now he finds himself utterly alone for the first time ever in his life. There's no noise, and he's there. So he continues to follow the railroad tracks, feeling more alive and at home in his body as he becomes accustomed to everything around him. After a while, he comes upon a group of 5 old men warming themselves around a fire. They welcome him in. A man named Granger offers him coffee as well as a beverage that changes the chemical makeup of his sweat to throw the hound off his scent. So more chemicals there. Do we have that today? Probably. Who knows? Probably. We have all kinds of technology that we don't even know about. So yeah, sure, probably. They all know who he is. They've been watching the chase on a portable TV. They've been expecting him because these people are connected to Faber. Okay, so they're connected. They know that Faber has sent him. Granger predicts the police will pick out a scapegoat so the public won't realize they've lost Montag. And isn't that the way it is? I mean, think about what we've seen lately on the news with the Epstein trials. Did Epstein kill himself? Is he dead? Is he in witness protection getting information while we have a distraction somewhere else? Who knows? But we definitely know that the establishment, we know that we are not always given the complete truth. And so, yeah, it's very possible that there'll be a scapegoat so the public won't realize they've lost Montag. Why is that important? Well, if they lose Montag, it shows a weakness, and they would never admit that they've lost Montag. That could never happen. So with strength, in order for them to remain strong, they're going to have to say, yes, we've got him. So together the men and Montag watch the end of the chase as the hound pounces an unsuspecting victim whose face is never quite in focus, and the announcer declares that Montag has been found and killed. It takes care of the narrative that um, the military complex of their world wants. Montag is considered dead, and anyone else that wants to do something like this will see that they can't escape. So the truth is never going to come out. And this goes back to the theme of everything that we say. How do we know what we know? We don't. We don't know. And it's even punctuated in literature like this. So Montag finds deep joy in the natural world that he never found in the distraction and noise of the city. He also becomes accustomed to feeling um, being comfortable being by himself. When he meets the men around the fire, I think that he's relieved that he's not alone to a point, but also that they're educated people, and he's going to be fulfilled. He's going to find something. So he recognizes these people have chosen to live their lives as a fugitive outside society. In this way, they're a combination of Montag and Faber. Notice how the authorities use television to lie to their people. Let me say that again for the people in the back. Notice also how the authorities use television to lie to their people. That's interesting. That's an interesting thought. Let's ask ourselves, do we have that today? Do you think that the authorities use television to lie to the people today? Just a question. No answers, just a question. Okay, so the men around the campfire, a reverend and four academics, ask Montag what he has to offer because he can't come without offering something. He says the book of Ecclesiastes, though only what he's memorized of it since he's lost the physical book. Granger is pleased, but says there's one other book of Ecclesiastes, but if anything happens to that man, Montag will be the last copy. So this is kind of interesting. The way that they are storing the books is just like in the 2018 version of the movie that we saw. They become the book. They memorize the book because they're a living library. Some people, like if you'll remember in the 2018 version, the young man had memorized many, many books, but everybody memorized a book, and this is how they store the book. Another reason that I really like that story, the 2018 version, I think it did a great job with this ending that the earlier video did not do. And I might even like it better than the ending of this book, if except for maybe one part that we've talked about. So Montag's limited but passionate attempts at reading have paid off. He has something to contribute. Granger describes Montag as a copy of the book of Ecclesiastes, implying that his knowledge is his main importance. He has become the book. Granger identifies himself as Plato's Republic, and another man at the campfire is Marcus Aurelius's work. He introduces the men by the authors they have memorized. That's who they've become. Granger explains they've all memorized books and then burned them because keeping books were too dangerous. Now, in the movie, if you remember the woman who stood up, she said, "I'm Toni Morrison." She had identified a Toni Morrison book, and that's who she identified as. So by identifying them by the works, they show their knowledge is more important than their identities. How cool is that? In a world of hiding books and hiding knowledge, the knowledge becomes more important than their identities. It's their words that matter. It's not in other words, it's not the medium, but the message that matters. So they become that author. I love that. I love that comment that their knowledge is more important than their identity. Granger explains that thousands of people across the country have memorized books and are lying low waiting for the war to be over. So that's a surprise to Montag. He probably never imagined that there was such resistance to the society. Once it's over, they hope people might be willing to listen to them. If not, they'll pass the books to the next generation and to the people of the cities already. So Granger wants Montag to understand that they're not going to feel superior to others. They're just the dust jackets. They're the holder of the knowledge. They're containers. Other than that, they're not important at all. There's zero significance. There's no arrogance that goes along with having knowledge. It is much more important to recognize that they are just the container. Someday they'll recite the books they remember so the text can be written down again. And then they put out the fire and move downstream. So we have a 180 here. Humankind has returned to an oral a tradition of literature. Once upon a time, that's the way literature began. Stories passed on in oral tradition around a campfire. So there's something kind of satisfying about seeing these people sitting around a campfire telling stories that are memorized, and knowing that that's how our stories began. Um, as it says, long before the time of Homer, when works of poetry were memorized and recited. In a sense, these men are waiting for society to be reborn, arise from its own ashes until it's safe again to write down works of literature. What rises from the ashes for rebirth? A phoenix, right? So it's almost like the symbolism here should be, this society should be a phoenix, the the growth of something new out of the ashes of something old and broken that didn't work. But I love that visual. And as they move downstream, Montag looks at the faces of the men, trying to find a sign of their inner resolve and their stores of knowledge. But the men just look old and uncertain in their efforts, uncertain if their efforts will be great consequence to the world. One of the men jokes that Montag shouldn't judge a book by its cover, and they all laughed. The men know their effort and sacrifice don't guarantee success, but they have given themselves to the cause of preserving knowledge, and that gives them an identity. Remember, it doesn't give them arrogance, it gives them an identity. They become a receptacle of the knowledge. They're not better because of what they know, they are just, they're just a holder for that book. And I really like that. But again, I feel more hope in the version of the video that we saw because of the omnius that we don't see here, and the use of that technology to save the literature. I really like that. Suddenly, a jet screams overhead on the way to the city. Montag thinks of Mildred and thinks of the other men, that something must be wrong with him because he doesn't really feel bad if she dies. He didn't love her. He doesn't really feel bad. He can barely even remember her. And Granger tries to comfort Montag, telling him about his own late grandfather, a sculptor. Granger believes that people are remembered when they touch the world they thought with thought and care, and in doing so, they change it even in small ways. So Granger here is expressing the idea of the importance of an individual engaging in the world. Mildred didn't never engage in the world. Um, Montag and Mildred didn't have a traditional marriage. There was no engagement. They were people who were together, but they weren't. There wasn't a relationship. He actually had more engagement with Clarice in that short time, just with the exchange of words and the encouragement of ideas. But someone who conforms and does not think and act for themselves like Mildred leaves no trace of themselves because they don't affect the world. So when Mildred dies, she's just gone. She has not left anything of value in the world, and she'll be forgotten. But Montag realizes that what he has, he can change the world just a little bit. So think about that. If our existence, our purpose in our world, if we don't touch something, if we don't change something, if we don't leave something of ourselves in society, in the world around us, with our families, if do we even do we even matter? I mean, if we don't make a point to be something, to make connections, to leave something for yourself, I think that's so important. So that's something we're going to explore a little bit later. I want you to think about that. What will you leave? What engagement will you leave? What do you hope to leave when it's all said and done and your life here is gone? What do you want to leave? What memory? What do you want people to think about you? What achievements? What impact do you want to leave on the world or on people around you? Because if you don't, what value really does your life have? So the war ends almost instantaneously, interestingly enough. The jets drop their bombs. The city is annihilated. The shockwave from the explosion knocks the men down. Just like Faber said, that society was going to be destroyed. Um, as he huddles against the ground, Montag thinks of Clarice, already dead, thinking that she is dead, and she may very well be. Faber on a bus to another annihilated city, and Mildred, whom he imagines horrifying detail in a hotel room at the moment of detonation. Suddenly he remembers where he and Mildred met in Chicago. So Faber described the mass media as having lost touch with reality. Let's think about that. Faber described the mass media having lost touch with reality, just as Hercules lifted Antiochus from the ground. Now the city and that mass media society is destroyed. Hey, I didn't write this, folks. I'm just telling you what Ray Bradbury predicted in his literature all those years ago. And oh, the irony. Faber described the mass media as having lost touch with reality. Could you say that the media actually destroyed itself and the world? Or the media and the military complex that created it, did it destroy itself? And I'm sure those people that were in charge of whatever, those elect few elite, were not involved in this. But again, this city was destroyed to start over. So now the city and the mass media society is destroyed. Montag huddles against the ground, and in the process, he reconnects with his past, and he does remember where he and Mildred meet. He then remembers the passage from the book of Ecclesiastes and recites it to himself. And after the aftershock of the bombs pass, they eat. Granger relates the story of the phoenix, the mythical bird that built a pyre, burns itself every few hundred years, and is born again. He must have been first cousin to man. Now, if you think about phoenix, you may know. Well, I'm holding that thought. The phoenix, with its connection to fire, appears throughout the book. On Betty's helmet, it symbolizes fire's destructive power. Now, though, it symbols rebirth from war and the nightmare mass media society. Like I said, I don't write this, guys. I'm just telling you. Bradbury wrote it. The nightmare mass media society that has taken over the United States. Hmm. It symbolizes rebirth from war and the nightmare mass media society that has taken over the United States. You may be familiar with the symbol of the phoenix if you're familiar with the Harry Potter stories, because the phoenix, like Fox, um, Dumbledore's phoenix, has burning days and rises from the ashes because it is a mythical bird that does that. And it is symbolic that this that there's going to be rebirth, that humankind is too strong to completely die. Do you think that's true? Or is humanity weak or is humanity strong? Would they let this happen again? Granger said it's their job to remember. The first thing they should do is build a mirror factory so everyone can take a long look at themselves. With Montag leading the way, the men head up the river to help the survivors and the destroyed city rise up from the ashes. Granger here implies the value of literature. They've memorized it, and it forces people to recognize and think for themselves. That's what the mirror factory is. It's the literature. In giving them the knowledge, it can be reflected back on them and they can have the wisdom to rebuild. Okay, so we're at the end of the novel. And my question to you, and very possibly is going to be a writing assignment again. If you are in this world, you have walked the walk with Montag, what book do you find important enough to save? What book is that valuable piece of information? And it can't be the Bible. This is one thing. We already have a Bible here. Nothing against the Bible at all. Definitely think it's a given the Bible should be saved. But I want you to pick one book, not a series. You can't save the entire Harry Potter series. Sorry, I love it too, but you can't save it. You can choose one book. I want you to tell me what book that would be. Within that parameter, one book that you would save and why. What is it? What is its meaning to you? What is its significance to you? how how important, and I want you to really think about this. What is something that one book that if this was really going to happen in society that you feel like you personally could make an attempt to save, you could, because it's important enough to you and you recognize it. And I'm not going to make you memorize it so you don't have to pick, one fish, two fish. You don't have to pick a small book. I want you to think about the books that you've read, you've been exposed to, and I want you to think about which ones of those books are so meaningful that that one book you want to save. Okay, we'll continue this, but we finished part 3, lecture and analysis of Fahrenheit 451. If you have questions, please let me know. There's still a lot like to unpack from this final section, and I'm sure we'll be discussing more about it. But I hope you enjoyed this brief little discussion slash lecture slash analysis. And I hope that you gained some information about what's going on in our society today compared to what Bradbury predicted all those years ago, because it's really uncanny how he hit it on the head, how he knew what was happening. So we're going to stop here. And luckily, I mean, um, hopefully you can be thinking about the book you want to save. And we'll be talking about that very soon.